What's going on? In this week's video, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my experience as a chapter officer, tell you a few things that I learned throughout that experience, hopefully teach you guys a few things that you can carry over into your year of service. So to give you a little bit of a background, I served as a chapter officer all 4 years I was in FFA. Well, kind of. You see, at my chapter, freshmen and sophomores serve as junior officers, and juniors and seniors serve as actual chapter officers. That being said, my freshman year I served as our junior second vice president. My sophomore year I served as our junior historian. My junior year I served as our chapter secretary. Then my senior year I served as our chapter's president. I took a lot away from my 4 years of service within our chapter, and the first one actually came my sophomore year, and the tip I will give you is learn to love failure. Now that sounds absolutely insane, and I don't mean that you need to love losing. In fact, I'm super competitive. I hate losing. But failure truly is the best teacher. So as you may notice when I was talking about the offices I held, my freshman year I went from being the junior second vice president to my sophomore year being the junior historian. Whenever I walked into that interview room my sophomore year, I thought I had it in the bag. I thought I was going to be the junior president, thought it was going to be all great, everything was going to get knocked out of the park. And I thought I did. I thought it was the best interview I'd given up until that point. Thought easily I had it, and then they came out with the results. I was absolutely devastated when I found out. And even though I was really upset in the moment, I learned that, hey, I maybe didn't give the best interview. There's still things I needed to work on. I still could improve. And that was a great learning point for me in that moment, because honestly, I would not be in the position I was today if it weren't for that failure. The next thing that I learned came my junior year. I had recently been appointed our chapter secretary, like I mentioned, and we were coming into a great year. Even though it was the year right after COVID and things were going to be a little different, we were ready for the challenges. But things did not go near what we thought they would be. It unfortunately was not a great year for our chapter. We went from being one of the most well-renowned chapters in our state to not. And the event that really culminated this was our national chapter application. Now, without getting into any specifics, there were a lot of pieces being moved around, there were a lot of pieces being taken out of the equation that culminated in our chapter getting a bronze emblem chapter for the first time in however many years. We had always been a gold emblem chapter, and I don't say that to brag, but just to show you kind of how much of a shock it was for us. But what I learned from this situation is that you're not going to be given things in life. You've actually got to work for them. And not only that, but you've got to learn to persevere through those tough situations. Fortunately for us, that's exactly what happened. Like I said, the very next year, my senior year, I was appointed our chapter's president, and a lot of the incoming officer team had the same mindset, like, hey, we're going to make this a great year, and it doesn't matter what happened in the previous year, but this year is going to be great. And it was. But that didn't come without a little bit of turmoil in the middle. If you've been following our socials for a while, you'll know last fall, I had a pretty serious knee injury that was sustained during football, and it put me out of commission for a long time. This, unfortunately for me, meant that I had to miss a lot of things. I had to miss a lot of activities, a lot of events, a lot of meetings that not only I wanted to be at, but I had a lot of input for. I had my visions, I had my ideas back during the planning meeting on how I wanted these activities to run. And for lack of a better term at the time, I was a little bit of a control freak. But that's what I learned to overcome, and that is the third point that I learned. I learned that it's not only important to trust your fellow officers and fellow teammates, but I also learned the importance of asking for help. I learned that it's important to be able to trust your fellow officers to accomplish a goal. While I had my own ideas on how I wanted this to go, we both had the same goal. We wanted the event to be great. We wanted it to be as good as possible. And though we may get about it in different ways, they got it done, and I learned that it's important to trust them. Now, like I said, I also learned that it's important to ask for help. And while I wasn't able to be at all these activities, I still had duties that I was able to carry out. But with the mix of recovery, the stress from schoolwork, and everything culminating, it got overwhelming and I wasn't able to do everything. And it didn't help that I kept taking on more tasks than I could actually handle, but I eventually learned to ask for help from my fellow officers as well as advisors. Now, that wasn't the only thing that I learned senior year. My senior year was quite eventful with everything in FFA. And honestly, this next thing that I learned was probably the most important thing I took out of this experience, just because I wasn't great at it before. But the most important thing that I learned is communication. Now, as I said, my senior year was quite eventful, and there were a lot of big changes. And one of the first ones that came in was we had 3 brand new advisors to our chapter, and we have 4 in total, but the one returning advisor had only been with us for a year. And this is not to say anything negative about their little bit of experience. In fact, I loved every single one of them, and every single one of them were amazing. This is just to say that I hadn't been around them as much. They didn't know me, and I had to learn to communicate with them. With the previous advisors I had had, there was almost like an unwritten form of communication where we're kind of like thinking the same thing without saying it. But with the new ones, I had to learn to communicate, and that was with a lot of different things. Whether it be that I needed to be at whatever event it was at X time and what all need to be done, or it be, hey, I have a baseball game this day, so I probably can't come to this event. Just different things like that played into my whole learning communication. Now, it was definitely rocky at times, but eventually everything clicked and everything was smooth sailing from there. Those were the takeaways that I had as serving as a chapter officer. And I'm by no means perfect, but I learned a lot of skills that made me a better leader, better communicator, and a better overall person. And I can't wait to see what I learn in this year as a state officer. But that's pretty much it for this video. If you like it, hit it with a like. If you didn't, hit it with a dislike. If you want to see more FFA related content, make sure to hit the subscribe button. And without further ado, I will see you guys next week.